Mr. Speaker.
Atamari tata katoa e noho. I welcome His Excellency Mr. Volodymyr Zelenskyy, President of Ukraine, joining us online. Mr. President. Good morning, Mr. President. Welcome.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Thank you. Mr. President, welcome, and I invite you to address the Parliament.
Дякую.
Thank you, dear friends,
пані прем'єр-міністре,
Madam Prime Minister,
пане спікере,
Mr.
пане лідер
Speaker,
опозиції, пані та
Mr.
панове
Leader of the
урядовці
Opposition,
та
ladies and gentlemen, the
парламентарі,
government,
народи Нової
parliamentarians,
Зеландії.
the people of New Zealand. I'm grateful for this opportunity to address you, and I would like to offer you to take a lead in the field of protecting the peace. This year has shown the whole world how much can be done with enough determination and knowledge of what needs to be done. Let's be honest, at the beginning of this year, no one in the world expected sensations from Ukraine when Russia's launched and launched their full-scale invasion. I heard only sympathy in the voices of many, but showing the determination response tend to change everything instantly. Everyone for whom the Ukrainians' struggle for freedom resonated in their hearts, later joined the global coalition in protection of freedom. Today, this anti-war coalition has more than 100 countries, those who support the fundamental principles of international law and the UN Charter, those in the international institutions like the UN General Assembly, who vote for decisions in favor of peace and territorial integrity of Ukraine, those who provide our country with armed support and train our military, those who imposed sanctions against terrorist state and constantly raise the price that Russia needs to pay for the aggression and global crises it provoked, and those who help us to restore and resolve those crises, those who do everything possible to make Russia's war criminals hold accountable for what they've done against Ukraine. Over the course of 293 days of this terrible war, the very course of events has created opportunities for different countries and leaders to prove themselves, to find their role in protection of what we cherish above all. I'm grateful to you, dear friends, for the fact that New Zealand was one of the first countries to support Ukraine in its struggle for independence and justice. Facing the unique moral challenge of this war, you've changed your own approaches to the sanctions policy and imposed national sanctions against those involved in fomenting the aggression. You've helped us with funding to cover the security needs with the supply of ammunition and training of the military. You've provided us with humanitarian assistance and support us on international platforms. We very much appreciate all this in Ukraine. I thank you once again for this support. But let me offer you one more thing. Various dictators and aggressors, they always fail to realize that the strength of the free world is not about someone becoming large or big and becoming full of missiles, but in the fact that everyone knows how to unite and act decisively and make its unique contribution to the common cause. Perhaps the time has come for your country to make such a unique contribution. I'm talking about one of the points of our formula for peace, which I proposed recently at the G19 summit in Indonesia. Maybe you've heard about the 10 points that can return peace to Ukraine and the whole of Europe, space, just as to restore the security and stability in the world that were shattered by Russian strikes. These are very transparent and logical points. These are radiation, nuclear security, food security, energy security, the release of all the prisoners of war, and the return of the deportees, the full implementation of the UN Charter, and restoration of the territorial integrity of Ukraine, the withdrawal of Russian troops from our territory that would result in a cessation of hostilities, the return of justice by bringing war criminals to justice, countering the ecocide, preventing the escalation of the war, and solidifying of its end. Each of these points can remove one or another element of Russia's aggression. Consequently, all of them would be able to bring peace. I propose to convene a special summit in the coming month. This would be Global Peace Formula Summit, where partner states could decide which of the points of this peace formula they could help us to implement. Just like we are implementing this second point of the formula, that is the food security. There is a format of cooperation with the UN, Turkey, and other partners that resulted in two initiatives that allowed to remove deficit on the world food market that was caused by the criminal Russians' blockade of our seaports. We've unblocked 3 Ukrainian seaports, and there's already some clear and evident results of that. Our grain initiative and the humanitarian initiative, which is called Grain from Ukraine, they're now working together to solve the challenge of the global hunger. By the way, you may learn more about these initiatives, and maybe you could see a role for yourself in settling the food crisis. But at the same time, I would like to ask you to focus on the 8th point of our formula for peace, which is a point about the environmental security. The wise people understand the impact of a war on the environment, and your society is truly a wise one. The economy and infrastructure can be reconstructed. Well, of course, it may take years, but you can't rebuild the destroyed nature, just as you can't restore the destroyed life. As of now, 174,000 square kilometers of Ukrainian territory are contaminated with mines and unexploded ordnance. The sea area of the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov are also contaminated with mines and has lost hundreds of thousands of living creatures, those who died as the result of hostilities and operations of Russia naval fleet. Dozens of rivers are polluted, hundreds of coal mines are flooded, dozens of the most dangerous enterprises, including chemical ones, have been destroyed by Russian strikes. 3 million hectares of forests in Ukraine are affected by hostilities. Now, all these and other manifestations of Russian ecocidal policy will have direct negative impact on millions of people, just as on our region and the neighboring regions as well. I'm sure that your society feels the fragility of our world. It feels how important it is for all people on the planet to pursue a rational policy towards our common home, just as, by the way, towards our common values on which the peaceful coexistence of people is based. It's therefore that I suggest to your country and your leaders to consider taking into account this environmental aspect of our formula for peace. I urge you to demonstrate leadership in international institutions, in particular in the UN and bilaterally with other states, so that the world would see these challenge that was brought by Russia's war, for the world to see that there is no real peace where any child can die from a hidden Russian anti-personnel mine. There's no true peace where the consequences of war could be there in the form of poisoned groundwater that may destroy normal life in several countries. There's no true peace where ecocide has taken place and its consequences have not been neutralized. Perhaps some might consider this aspect won't result in any sensations, but until today, the world has no strong experience in overcoming the destructive impact of war on the environment. We will liberate our land. We will win in this war. I'm confident that we will return freedom and security to all Ukrainians wherever they live. The countries of the world are already taking leadership in the implementation of certain points of our formula for peace. For example, the point on justice. Just yesterday, the Netherlands declared their readiness to host the tribunal on the crime of Russia's aggression against Ukraine. I call upon you to support the Ukrainian formula for peace in your parliament and to start consolidating the world around the 8th point of the formula, that is the countering of ecocide. Let Russia hold responsibility for all the manifestations of its aggression. Thank you for your attention. Na Mehi, and glory to Ukraine.
I call the Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, tēnā koutou katoa and kia ora, Mr. President. On behalf of the people of Aotearoa, New Zealand, we say thank you. Yours is a country at war, and you are at the helm, leading your people through a crisis. Sharing time with us under those circumstances is a sacrifice and one we do not take lightly. But I hope that in response to the address that you have given today, that you hear loudly and clearly that yours is not a forgotten war. And nothing could be more emblematic of that, I hope, than so many parties of the New Zealand Parliament on the other side of the world coming together to condemn Russia's war and stand firmly and clearly with you. Our support for Ukraine was not determined by geography. It was not determined by history or by diplomatic ties or relationships. Our judgment was a simple one. We asked ourselves the question, what if it was us? What if it was us that experienced a breach of our territorial integrity? What if it was us that was the subject of a breach of the international rules-based order, of the blatant misuse of multilateral institutions? We would want the international community to use their voice, regardless of their political system, their distance or their size. And so that is what we have done, by supporting Ukraine in the most practical ways possible. Mr. President, you have our soldiers from New Zealand training yours in the United Kingdom, and I have heard firsthand the experience of our soldiers in those training exercises and the tenacity and courage of your people. We have provided medical supplies and personal equipment for those in the field. Our assets have helped to move supplies around the region at some of the most critical points of the conflict. But we have also done what we can to hold Russia to account for their actions. As you acknowledge, we passed the Russia Sanctions Act to implement unilateral sanctions for the first time ever. We've put in place extensive travel bans. We've committed to join Ukraine's case against Russia at the International Court of Justice and provided funding to the International Criminal Court to investigate war crimes and crimes against humanity in Ukraine. But those who support Russia must also be challenged. Just this morning, we announced sanctions against Iran, who are complicit in the supply of drones to Russia. They will now be the third country sanctioned under the Russia's Sanctions Act, alongside Russia and Belarus. We've looked to support citizens in Ukraine with a special visa to ensure our Ukrainian community can bring their families here, of which more than 1,100 have now been granted. And we've also provided humanitarian aid to support those who remain in country. And with the onset of winter and with energy supply used as a weapon of war, New Zealand today pledges further assistance to the people of Ukraine. We're committing an additional $3 million through the International Committee of the Red Cross to support your people with basic humanitarian needs at this time. Needs like medical supplies and equipment, power transformers and generators to cope with blackouts, and essential winter items for vulnerable families like food, water, sanitation and hygiene items. This is in addition to the $7.9 million we've provided to support Ukrainian communities. But, Mr. President, our ambition remains a region and a world that returns to peace and stability, just as it is your ambition as well. And I acknowledge the peace plan that you've set out for the Parliament today. This war, in our view, must not become a gateway to a more polarised and dangerous world for generations to come. Our solidarity with Ukraine is matched by our resolve to strengthen the international institutions that govern us and to accelerate disarmament. Mr. President, I want to acknowledge your further calls for support, especially around the long-term impacts of war, including, as you've pointed out today, the long-term impact on the environment. New Zealand has a history in the space of reconstruction post-conflict, and that includes remediation, such as dealing with unexploded ordinances. We are with you as you seek peace, but we will also be with you as you rebuild. President Zelenskyy, we acknowledge the people of Ukraine, those who are fighting and protecting their country, those who are taking care of their families and others. We acknowledge the ongoing hardships of winter, but we also acknowledge you. You have been unrelenting in your ongoing support of your country, of your people, of your army. You continue an ongoing battle with unparalleled determination. You have coordinated an international response. You have united those who act in the interests of the rules-based order. New Zealanders recognise your persistence, your support of your people, your country. We support you. Kia kaha, kia maia, kia manawa nui, Slava Ukraini.
I call Christopher Luxon, Leader of the Opposition.
President Zelenskyy, thank you for taking time to talk with us this morning. It is a great honour and a tremendous privilege for all of us to have you address our New Zealand Parliament today. And while there is a vast distance between our countries in geography and circumstances, I, like so many New Zealanders, have followed with horror and disbelief the war in Ukraine. And we all appreciate the opportunity to be able to say to you, kia kaha, which in our Indigenous Māori language means stay strong. When 10 months ago the world learned that Russian tanks had rolled into Ukraine, there was disbelief and immediate condemnation of Russia's audacity in the face of international outrage. All countries were at that point forced to choose sides. It was a moment for all nations to stand up and to be counted. But for those nations that value democracy, respect national sovereignty and borders, and uphold the international rule of law, the choice was simple. New Zealand is one of those countries. Confronted with brutality or diplomacy, autocracy or democracy, darkness or light, there was nothing to discuss except how to individually and collectively to support Ukraine. This conflict is described as a war between Ukraine and Russia, but it is far bigger than that. It is a moral as well as a physical battle. It is frankly an existential threat to Ukraine, a war that Ukraine cannot and will not lose. President Zelenskyy, your courageous leadership and moral certitude has been inspiring to us all. You have been our generation's Winston Churchill. And since those Russian tanks crossed Ukraine's border, you have been unwavering in your determination that Ukraine will win this war, that it did not want and that it did not start. And of all the miscalculations Vladimir Putin has made, and there are many, underestimating your resolve and the impact that the strength of your leadership and your words would have in rallying Ukraine and the world has perhaps been the biggest. You said that Ukrainians would fight for Ukraine. You said they would be willing to die for their country. And in laying down their lives for what they believed in and on behalf of their fellow Ukrainians, they have proved you right. In fighting for Ukraine, they have fought for the democratic values and national sovereignty that so many countries and people all around the world share and believe in. But the burden of that fight has fallen primarily on Ukraine. 10 months ago, Ukrainian men and women who were accountants and cooks and teachers and mechanics became almost overnight soldiers. Their courage, their commitment, and their resilience has amazed and humbled the world. Their sacrifice compels other countries to help. We cannot stand back, we must stand up. None of us, especially a small country like New Zealand, wants to believe that might is right. We want to believe that moral courage is just as important. But this war has proved that when you have to fight for what you believe in, you need an army, weapons, ammunition, and friends to help defend your interests. This war has again highlighted the shortcomings of the United Nations, whose purpose is noble, but whose impact is weak. This international group could not prevent one authoritarian power launching a war on its neighbour. Every country, I think, has learned that it is a mistake to think that they themselves or their friends can do without firepower. We might wish it to be different, but to support a collective response, we all must be able to contribute. When the history of this war is written, the greatest condemnation will be for Vladimir Putin. The greatest admiration will be for you, President Zelenskyy, and your courageous leadership. The greatest gratitude will be for the people of Ukraine. Daily, we see images of indiscriminate attacks on civilians that leave broken and burning villages, cities, homes, and schools. And the death of every single Ukrainian is a tragedy. The greatest regret of this war will be the terrible loss of life that has left tens of thousands of Ukrainian families bereft. But one day, peace will come again to Ukraine. We can't see how or when, but it will come. And at that point, the international community will need to rally to support a reconstruction program, because while the loss of life is the most terrible toll, the loss of homes and communities and critical infrastructure is also incalculable. I feel confident, even from opposition, in saying that New Zealand will be part of that rebuilding effort. I cannot imagine circumstances where we would not be. But for now, in the most bitter winter for Ukraine, and on behalf of the New Zealand National Party, I send to you our deepest condolences, our tremendous respect and great admiration. This war is cruel, it is immoral, and it is wrong. But for as long as Russia continues to fight, Ukraine must continue to fight, and we and the rest of the world must continue to back you. We in New Zealand hope and pray that this war ends soon, and until it does, my pledge is that the New Zealand National Party, like the rest of New Zealand, will stand with you. Kia kaha.
The Honourable James Shaw.
President Zelenskyy, on behalf of the Green Party of Aotearoa New Zealand, I do first want to acknowledge the pain and the suffering of the Ukrainian people. Russia's invasion of Ukraine is as barbaric as it is illegal. In the horror of war, it is ordinary people who suffer the most. It is apparent that there have been and continues to be a multitude of war crimes perpetuated on the Ukrainian people by the Russian forces. We condemn this extraordinary violence. We condemn these breaches of international law, and we condemn the violation of fundamental human rights in the strongest possible terms. The priority must be an end to Russia's aggression and peace for the Ukrainian people. President Zelenskyy, I do want to thank you for your address to Parliament, and I do want to acknowledge and thank you for opening your address in the Indigenous language of Aotearoa New Zealand. I acknowledge your leadership and the fortitude of your people in the face of the violence visited upon you and your people. One of the central principles of the Charter of the Green Party of Aotearoa New Zealand is a commitment to non-violent conflict resolution. It is quite apparent that, were President Putin to be successful, the temporary violence of war would morph into the permanent violence of subjugation, perhaps even genocide. It is therefore vital that Ukraine can defend itself. We have to acknowledge that Ukraine's response to Russia's violence will itself involve some violence, not because Ukraine wants that, but because you have little choice against an aggressor so firmly committed to violent means. And I applaud the efforts of you and your administration to minimise harm to civilians and to conduct your war within the norms that we would expect of a civilised nation. New Zealand's role in the global response to this conflict must be to support a peaceful resolution however we can, and respect for Ukraine's territorial integrity as provided for under international law. We are best placed to support humanitarian efforts to deal with the rippling consequences of the conflict. This involves aid, relief, corridors and refugee resettlement. We should increase our work with multilateral institutions and support their attempts to bring about a peaceful solution to this awful conflict. And as you have called upon us to do what we can to restore food security and to address the ecocide that accompanies the genocide. If we can assist with mediation or to encourage larger states to engage in de-escalation, we strongly support that. Whether through diplomatic efforts, humanitarian work or the use of our respected status on the international stage, New Zealand is well placed to form this contribution. When it comes to any future military support that New Zealand might provide, we would ask that it comes before this Parliament. The extent to which our efforts further the cause of peace or exacerbate the violence of war is surely a matter for this House, rather than just the government alone. President Zelenskyy, as a member of the Green Party, I have a fundamental commitment to non-violence. As a New Zealander, I have an interest and a commitment to a functional international system. The situation in Ukraine remains impossibly difficult in ways that we in Aotearoa New Zealand cannot possibly imagine. It is historic that you, as the head of a government in a land that is besieged by an invading, colonising power, has addressed this House. Ukraine is not alone in the sense that we and many others around the world stand alongside you and are supporting your cause. But you are also not alone, sadly, in the sense that there are many other peoples still on every continent who are also suffering from violence and subjugation. I would suggest to this House that perhaps we might look at ourselves and ask ourselves why it is that we don't extend them the same support that we do to the people of Ukraine. As Dr. Martin Luther King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. I sincerely hope that we do everything in our power to support the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine and peace for her people. I also hope that we might allow ourselves to have you, Mr. President, and the people of Ukraine remind us here how important these principles are for everyone, and to recommit ourselves to these principles and to do everything in our power for all people everywhere, that these human rights may one day be truly universal. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
David Seymour.
Mr. President, thank you for taking the time to address our Parliament. I'll keep my remarks short because you have many urgent things to do. I want you and the Ukrainian people to know that on the other side of the world, people care deeply about your struggle against evil. And to echo our Prime Minister, yours is not a forgotten war. We read the news, we see the pictures of what is happening to your people and how you are fighting back for your lives. But I want you to know that we understand that a dictator attacking our democracy matters to New Zealand. Your people are not just fighting for their lives, but for all of our freedom and democracy. And I want you to know that your leadership and courage inspires us. New Zealanders, I know, are on the ground in Ukraine right now, not with government, by their own initiative. In our community, people have come together twice this year to raise money for your effort. At 2 fundraisers we organised, we raised $80,000 for your United 24 fund and to buy warm winter clothes for the defenders of Ukraine. And we'll keep doing those fundraisers until you win. Our donors were particularly pleased to buy luggage tags made from bits of aluminium from downed Russian jets. What great initiative under fire. As opposition MPs, we've pressured government to do more. More sanctions, more refugee places, more lethal aid, when we'll keep pushing them from this side of our Parliament. And if our government changes before you win, the New Zealand government will do a lot more than the $3 million you saw today. And I want to finish by quoting the former Australian Prime Minister, Kevin Rudd. He said recently in Foreign Affairs, to prevail in the unfolding ideological war that now stretches before us, will require a radical re-embrace of the principles that distinguish liberal democratic political systems. Western leaders must defend those ideals in word and deed. They too must become true believers. For now, please let me say that you are right and you are fighting against evil for all our freedom. And we back you not only in word but in deed. Slava Ukraini.
Kia ora, tēnā koe te rangatira. Ka mihi ke a koe mo tō pauritanga, ka tuahau ki te tangi, mō tō ao. I stand here on behalf of Te Pāti Māori Te Rangatira to mihi to you, to cry for you, and to acknowledge the pain and the suffering that you and your people are enduring. Ka tautoko au Te Pāti Kakariki. We also support the kōrero, a lot that was shed from Te Pāti Māori, from Te Pāti Kakariki Green. The fragility of our world is no more felt than when we see the suffering of women and children. And I want to be able to keep this call very short and simple. We have little to say today. All the teachings have been learnt on former occasions of war. We have been living together quietly. There will be nothing but mate, but death for generations to come. We are small in numbers, but we are strong. We are fighting for not the part of peace, but the whole of peace. It may be dark today, and many think that it will be fine tomorrow, but the people are dead, and the land is dead. And we today have one role only, and that is to fight for peace. And that was something that was shared from Tohu and Te Whiti, our prophets in Taranaki, our leaders who fought for peace. E te Premier, e te rangatira, we condemn war. We have nothing at all to share in the perils of war that we can sit there and say that we endorse anyone or anything that has taken the mana motahake off a community, a world, a country. Our role in this generation is and must be to fight for unity. And as we did in Parihaka, we will, Te Pāti Māori, at all costs, no matter who is in this house, continue to fight to uphold peace, to continue to make sure that there is no suffering, that there is nothing that this legacy and this generation can be ashamed of that we have seen in the past. So for us, e te rangatira, we again mihi to you, to all your people. We share in your pain and we wish you peace, and that is our role today. E te tungane raori.
E tōko whitu atu kia kāra, ka tira te hinga hinga ki rarora, mana whakaro kei runga rawa, hei arahi te ara e tikai, whirina ki tātou katoa, kia kotahira. Amara e tunore, amara e tunore, auera e tamama, te mama e te paurinui, e patu nei auina, kia kotahira, ngarimu, auera. Ane toi wi e ruru tune arai aue e tōko whitu atu kia pahara, ka tira te hinga hinga ki rarora, mana whakaro kei runga rawa, hei arahi te ara e tikai, whirina ki tātou katoa, kia kotahira.
Kia ora rā, tēnā koutou katoa.
Mr. President, on behalf of members of the New Zealand Parliament, we would like to thank you for your time this morning. You and the Ukrainian people are in our thoughts. and we wish you all the very best to you. That song was a song that was written in the Second World War, and it was an honour for our Parliament to sing it to you this morning. Nō reira, huri rauna, tēnā rā tātou katoa. This session is concluded. The House will sit again at 9 a.m. today. Kia ora.